The Dreamer's Journey, From Pit to Palace, Introduction, The Unseen Hand. He was betrayed by his own blood, sold into slavery, unjustly accused, and forgotten in a prison cell. But what Joseph didn't know was that every tear, every closed door, and every lonely night were part of God's purpose for his life. Joseph's story isn't just about a man who triumphed over adversity. It is about a God who transforms painful processes into extraordinary destinies. Why your dream seems to be taking so long to come true? If so, this story is for you. Here, you will understand how God uses time, injustice, and even betrayal to align you with the purpose He wrote before you were born. Joseph was forgotten by men, but remembered by God. And in the same way, perhaps you think you're standing still, but God is positioning you. There are three powerful phases in Joseph's life that reveal the path for everyone God calls to great purposes: the pit, the prison, and the palace. Each one hides a lesson that can change how you see the process you are experiencing today. Phase 1, the pit, where purpose begins with rejection. It all started with a dream. A young man of only 17 years old, full of faith, enthusiasm, and purity, had a vision that would change the course of history. He saw sheaves of wheat bowing down before his sheaf, and then the sun, moon, and stars bowing down before him. It was a dream that revealed the destiny God had prepared, a destiny of leadership and influence. But it was also a dream that aroused the envy of those who did not understand the purpose. Joseph's brothers couldn't bear to see in him something that wasn't in them. The light he carried bothered them because every time Joseph spoke of his dreams, it was as if a mirror rose before them, revealing how far they were from what God expected. Whoever doesn't understand God's purpose for their own life will often try to extinguish the light of those who have understood theirs. One day, Joseph was sent by his father to visit his brothers in the fields. They saw him from afar, wearing his coat of many colors, and before he could say a word, they plotted against him. "Here comes the dreamer," they sneered. "Let's kill him and see what will become of his dreams." But God already had plans. Reuben, the eldest, convinced his brothers not to kill him directly. Instead, they stripped him of his coat and threw him into an empty well in the middle of the desert, a cold, dark, and inescapable hole. There alone, without understanding what was happening, Joseph learned his first lesson: God's purpose begins when we lose control. While he was the favorite son, surrounded by privileges and comfort, he was not yet ready for the destiny God had prepared. The pit was the first step in the process. It was the place where Joseph needed to let go of his pride, self-confidence, and need for the approval of others. Perhaps you are in that pit now. A time when no one understands you, when it seems that God has forgotten you, and the promises that once seemed clear now seem distant and impossible. But the pit is not the end. It is the place where God begins. It was in the pit that Joseph discovered that God's presence does not depend on the setting, but on the certainty that He is still there. Even when the ground disappears, the pit is the place of separation. God uses rejection to redirect. He allows certain people to move away, not because you have lost something, but because He is protecting you from those who would not fit into your future. If Joseph had remained in his father's house, he would never have seen the fulfillment of his dream. God needed to take him out of the nest to bring him to the palace. God didn't call you to a predictable life. He called you to live the impossible. But before the impossible comes the improbable. And the improbable is the pit, the place where you are tested, forged, and broken, until you are ready to carry what He will place in your hands. The brothers sold Joseph for 20 pieces of silver to a caravan of Ishmaelites passing by. While they thought they were getting rid of him, they were actually sending Joseph directly onto the path of his destiny. That's why you can't despair over those who betrayed you, because often it is precisely through betrayal that God pushes you toward the promise. Joseph went down to Egypt as a slave, but God already had a governor in him. Those who rejected him didn't know they were collaborating with the divine plan. Phase 2. The prison, when purpose is tested by time. Joseph left the pit without understanding, but trusting. He was taken in chains, walking under the scorching desert sun towards Egypt. From a beloved son, he became a slave. But even there in a strange country, the hand of God never left him. He was sold to Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard. Even though he was a servant, Joseph carried something no one could take away, the presence of God. Everything he touched prospered. Potiphar's house was blessed because of him. When purpose is within you, it bears fruit even in the desert. No matter where you are placed, those filled with God make the impossible flourish. But the enemy always tries to interrupt the plan before its time. Potiphar's wife was charmed by Joseph. Day after day she provoked him, wanting to drag him into sin. But Joseph feared the Lord more than he desired to please men. When he refused her advances, she falsely accused him of attacking her. Joseph was unjustly accused. He did not defend himself, trusting in God's justice. He was thrown into prison as a criminal, even though he had done what was right. This is where purpose is put to the test, when you do good and seem to be punished for it. Joseph's imprisonment was not punishment, it was refinement. God took him out of Potiphar's house because the plan was greater than the possession of a servant. But before placing a crown on his head, God needed to mold his heart. In prison, Joseph experienced the silence of God. That kind of silence that hurts, that confuses, that makes you wonder, Lord, are you still with me? And even without answers, he remained faithful. He worked, served, and helped others. While waiting for his liberation, he liberated the hearts around him. There he met the king's cupbearer and baker, two men anguished by strange dreams. Joseph listened to them and said, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." God spoke through him, and everything happened exactly as Joseph said. The cupbearer was restored to his position. The baker was executed. Before the cupbearer left, Joseph asked only one thing: "Remember me when you stand before Pharaoh." But the cupbearer forgot. 2 long years passed, 2 years of forgetfulness. 2 years of unanswered prayer. Perhaps this is the most painful part of the process, when those you helped forget you, and time seems to stand still. But God does not forget. Joseph's waiting time was the time of preparation for the throne. While he waited in prison, God was preparing the scene in the palace. When the purpose is God's, no human forgetfulness can delay it. God was teaching Joseph to trust in the unseen, to understand that the favor of men is fleeting, but faithfulness is eternal. Prison teaches us the value of patience. It reveals who continues to serve when there is no audience. It shows who loves God for who he is and not for what he does. Joseph did not murmur. He transformed prison into a ministry. Because of this, the jailer gave him responsibility for all the prisoners. Even within the bars, Joseph ruled. When you live your purpose, even prison becomes a territory of authority. God was training Joseph to lead, but first, he made him lead in a place where no one wanted to be. If you feel stuck in a season of life, understand that prison is God's time to mature you. It is the time to silence the noise around you so that you learn to hear only His voice. It is the time when God teaches you to wait without losing faith, to serve without being seen, to trust without understanding. It was in prison that the dreamy boy became a man ready to reign. There is a kind of maturity that is only born in the silence of prison. And then, when the right time comes, a simple memory changes everything. Pharaoh had a dream that no one could interpret, and the cupbearer suddenly remembered, "Today I remember my sins." There was a young Hebrew man in prison. At the exact moment, God made the forgotten one be remembered. What seemed like silence was actually strategy. Joseph is summoned before Pharaoh, changes his clothes, and in a few hours leaves prison for the palace. God can change an entire story in a single day, but he takes the time necessary to prepare the heart. Phase 3. The palace, when purpose is fulfilled. Joseph stood before the most powerful man on earth. Pharaoh recounted his troubling dream: 7 fat cows eaten by 7 thin cows, and 7 full ears of grain devoured by 7 burnt ears. No wise man in Egypt could interpret it. But Joseph, filled with the Spirit of God, humbly replied, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a peaceful answer." At that moment, heaven spoke through his life. Joseph revealed that 7 years of plenty would be followed by 7 years of severe famine. He also revealed the strategy: store food during the good years so that Egypt could survive the bad years. Pharaoh was impressed. He asked his servants, "Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God?" Pharaoh placed his own royal ring on Joseph's hand, a symbol of authority. He dressed him in fine linen garments and placed a gold chain around his neck. He made Joseph second in command throughout all of Egypt. The slave now ruled, the forgotten one was remembered by all. The dreamer now saw the fulfillment of the vision. But the most beautiful thing is that the palace did not change Joseph's heart. He who was faithful in the pit and upright in prison remained humble even with the crown on his head. Joseph learned that purpose is not about position, it's about mission. It is not about being exalted, it is about being available to fulfill God's plan. The years of plenty passed, and the granaries were filled. Then the famine came. It struck Egypt and all the surrounding lands, including Canaan. Jacob, old and weary, heard there was grain in Egypt. He sent his sons, the very brothers who had sold Joseph, to buy food, so they would not die. When they arrived in Egypt, they were led into the presence of the governor. They bowed down before him, with their faces to the earth, fulfilling the dream Joseph had seen so many years ago. They did not recognize him. Joseph was older, dressed like an Egyptian nobleman, and spoke with authority. But Joseph recognized them immediately. His heart stopped. The past stood before him. He saw the faces marked by the desert. He wondered, have they changed? Are they repentant? Joseph spoke harshly to them, accusing them of being spies to test their hearts. They insisted they were honest men, sons of one father, and mentioned their youngest brother, Benjamin, who was at home. Hearing Benjamin's name, his beloved brother, the only other son of his mother Rachel, Joseph's heart trembled. He controlled his tears and demanded they bring Benjamin to prove their words, keeping Simeon in prison as a guarantee. The brothers returned to Canaan terrified. When the food ran out again, Judah convinced a reluctant Jacob to let them take Benjamin back to Egypt, promising to bear the blame forever if he did not bring the boy back. When they returned to Egypt with Benjamin, Joseph almost collapsed. He prepared a banquet for them, but he needed one last test. He ordered his silver cup to be hidden in Benjamin's sack. As the brothers left the city, Joseph's guards stopped them, found the cup, and dragged them back. Benjamin was accused of theft and sentenced to become a slave. This was the moment of truth. Would they abandon Benjamin as they had abandoned Joseph? But Judah stepped forward. Weeping, he pleaded with Joseph. "Do not take the boy," he begged. "His father's life is bound up in the boy's life. If he does not return, our father will die. Please, take me as a slave instead. Let the boy go." At that moment, seeing that his brothers were now willing to sacrifice their own lives for the youngest, Joseph could no longer contain his emotion. He ordered all his Egyptian servants to leave the room. His voice choked with emotion, tears streaming down his face. He shouted, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" His brothers were paralyzed with terror. The past returned with force: the guilt, the fear, the shame. They were standing before the brother they had betrayed, who now had the power of life and death over them. But Joseph raised his hand and said the words that defined his life: "Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life." The revelation filled the atmosphere with healing, grace, and purpose. The past was no longer a prison, but a bridge to redemption. Joseph embraced his brothers and wept over them. He sent for his father, Jacob. When the old patriarch arrived in Egypt and saw his son alive, he threw himself into Joseph's arms, weeping as one who receives life back from the dead. The family was reunited in the land of Goshen. The dream was fulfilled. The promise did not die. Conclusion: the meaning of the journey. Joseph did not celebrate revenge, he chose forgiveness. He understood that the purpose is not to prove who was wrong, but to reveal who God always was. There, Joseph understood everything, every tear, every betrayal, every silence, and every weight. Nothing was in vain. Everything was part of God's perfect plan. Here is the great lesson: God's purpose is never just about you. It's about how many lives He will reach through you. Joseph was raised up to save a nation and his own family. The boy who was rejected became an instrument of reconciliation. The prisoner became a provider. The dreamer became a savior. Perhaps that is the revelation you need today. What you experienced wasn't punishment. It was preparation. What hurt shaped you. What you lost, God used to align you with destiny. There are times when God takes us to the palace, not to exalt us, but to show that the whole process had meaning. God doesn't waste pain. The pit taught you to depend on Him. The prison taught you to wait. The palace shows you that it was worth trusting. Joseph looked back and saw the thread of grace. If his brothers hadn't sold him, he wouldn't have reached Egypt. If Potiphar's wife hadn't accused him, he wouldn't have met the cupbearer. If the cupbearer hadn't forgotten him, he wouldn't have been remembered by Pharaoh at the exact right moment. Each injustice was a disguised bridge. Each delay was an invisible direction. Such is God's purpose. He writes straight, even when the page seems torn. And in the end, Joseph could say to his brothers, "You intended evil against me, but God turned it into good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save many people alive." This is the journey of all who have a calling. God allows the pit, sustains in prison, and exalts in the palace. Don't give up halfway, don't doubt in the silence. And don't lose faith in the waiting. The same God who was faithful to Joseph is faithful to you. Perhaps you don't see it now, but God is building something eternal through your story. And in due time, He will place you before the purpose that has always been yours. Because God's promise may seem delayed, but it never fails. And the purpose He designed for your life is greater than everything you have lost.